My name is Alfredo Sadfilho. I'll be chairing this session as a member of the Isaac and Tamara Deutscher Memorial Prize Committee. This prize, it's in honor of two brave and very influential comrades. The prize has been awarded since 1969 for the book that exemplifies the best and most innovative new writing in or about the Marxist tradition. For the past several years, the prize winner has been announced at the Historical Materialism Conference in London. In the previous year's winner delivers a lecture, which we'll have in a moment, and the text is subsequently published in the Historical Materialism Journal. The relationship between the Deutscher Prize and historical materialism is very important to us. We are very grateful to the editorial board for their commitment to supporting the prize. So in a moment, I'm going to announce the winner of the 2025 Deutscher Memorial Prize. In sequence, I'm going to introduce tonight's speaker, Matteo Pasquinelli, who was awarded the prize last year for his wonderful book, The Eye of the Master. But before I do this, let me join all comrades in celebrating what I'm sure has already been noted and celebrated many times today, but I'd like to start the session by honoring the Bolshevik Revolution and the overthrow of the provisional government 108 years ago. That wonderful attempt to storm heaven and transform the earth, change the history of the world. We celebrate, we remember, we honor, we acknowledge those brave heroes. Let me now announce the short list for the 2025 Isaac and Tamara Deutscher Prize. The short list includes 6 wonderful books that showcase the diversity, strength, and vitality of Marxist work today. These are really outstanding books in alphabetical order of title. The Deutscher Prize short list for 2025 is The Arts of Logistics, Artistic Production in Supply Chain Capitalism by Michael Shane Boyle. The Backstage of the Care Economy, Transnational Perspectives on the Commercialization of Care by Helmer Lutz. Christopher Hill, The Life of a Radical Historian by Michael Braddock. Citizen Marx, Republicanism and the Formation of Karl Marx's Social and Political Thought by Bruno Leipold. Crude Capitalism, Oil Capitalism and the Making of the World Market by Adam Hanier. And The Late Marxist Revolutionary Roads, Colonialism, Gender, and Indigenous Communism by Kevin Anderson. And now I have the enormous pleasure to announce the winner of the 2025 Isaac and Tamara Deutscher Memorial Prize is Bruno Leipold for his marvelous book, Citizen Marx. Bruno, congratulations. And Bruno will be delivering next year's lecture at the next Historical Materialism Conference here in London. Let's move to today's lecture. As I mentioned previously, Matteo Pasquinelli was awarded the 2024 Deutscher Memorial Prize for The Eye of the Master, a social history of artificial intelligence that was published by Verso. Matteo is Associate Professor in Philosophy of Science at the Department of Philosophy and Cultural Heritage at Ca' Foscari University in Venice. He also coordinates the ERC project AI Models on the history and epistemology of AI. His research has focused on the intersection of philosophy of mind, political economy, and techniques of automation, including artificial intelligence. The Eye of the Master has been translated already into 12 languages. Matteo has also published widely articles, including in eFlux, the Journal of Interdisciplinary History of Ideas, the Le Monde du Travail, Multitudes, Qui Parle, Radical Philosophy, Sociologia del Lavoro, South Atlantic Quarterly, and many other outlets. The title of today's lecture is Vector for Workers, Models of Automation and Autonomy in the Long AI Century. Matteo will speak for about 50 minutes or however long he wants to speak for. And if there is time at the end, we'll open for questions. So, Matteo, thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Alfredo and comrades, for awarding me this honor, and congratulations to Bruno also for achieving this prize this year. Okay, let's talk about artificial intelligence. Unfortunately, the rise of artificial intelligence, in my view, but I think it also, according to many of us present here tonight, should be read not as a neutral technological advance, but as the latest stage in a long struggle. The clash between capitalism drives towards automation, labor's resistance to exploitation, and society quest for autonomy. To situate AI within this history, past theories of automation must be revisited and expanded. But what is a theory of automation? It's not a study of the impact of technology on society, as media studies often do, but a causal mode to explain how automation develops and why it takes one form rather than the other. Despite abundant literature, a robust automation theory to address the predicament of AI and the trade of labor, knowledge, and capital is still lacking, in my opinion. Certainly, the problem is inheriting past unresolved controversy. In the 19th century, to make some important philosophical references, philosophy debated automation through Hegel's notion of abstract labor, which Marx, we know, deeply criticized. Hegel saw the machine as a materialization of workers' abstract labor, that is, the abstraction of the division of labor, while Marx saw the machine a materialization of capital's abstract labor, that is, the abstraction of value. Adam Smith's analysis of the division of labor influenced Hegel's idea, while it has been forgotten that Marx engaged with Charles Babbage's principle of labor calculation. All these ideas remain useful to illuminate the role of technology in the capital-labor nexus, but a schism took place. Often theories of automation based on the labor form or knowledge are traced back to Hegel, while those based on the value form to Marx. The role of knowledge in automation remained misrecognized. How to recompose today such a schism? A general consensus, I think, to start with, can be found around the following basic theory. Technological development is driven simultaneously by an economy of profit, selling more or more expensive commodities, time, making things faster, space, organizing things better, energy and resources, making things cheaper, and particularly labor, paying workers less. The labor component is crucial. The way in which workers are measured and remunerated, and whether or not they resist measure and remuneration, affects technological innovation. History teaches that automation is introduced where labor resistance is stronger and labor cost high. Yet other factors we'll see play a role. And for reason of presentation tonight, compressing maybe too much, I present here, I want to discuss four groups, four theories of automation: standpoint, labor, metric, and value theories of automation. In short, we will see standpoint theory of automation, see automation as a space of social conflict and antagonism. Labor theories of automation stress the role of the division of labor in giving shape to the design of automation. Metric theories see as automation as a problem of measure and calculation. And value theories explains automation mostly as a process guided by capital that remain agnostic to its design. All these positions are clearly entangled and dialectical. In the eye of the master, I focus mostly on the labor theory of automation, as I call it, as a lens to read artificial intelligence. In this lecture, I will try to integrate other theories with a proposal to sketch an organic theory of automation. A theory of automation that could indeed cross the long century of AI, that is this epoch of knowledge automation that started at least with the Industrial Revolution. This presentation of the problem, of course, takes inspiration from part 4 of Capital, where Marx describes machinery as a means for the production of relative surplus value. Marx's argument is systematic. Starting from the beginning, one descends from capital into the ramification of the cooperation of labor, and then into the organization of industrial machine and large factories, ending with the recognition of working class resistance against machines. Yet this itinerary can be read backwards to grasp its political trajectory. Starting from the end, Marx presents a standpoint theory of automation, section 15.5, within the labor theory of automation, chapter 14 and 15 on machinery and large-scale industry, which is itself cast within a value theory of automation, the chapter 12 on the concept of relative surplus value at the very beginning. Thus, while the economic analysis begins with capital, the political synthesis begins with the antagonism of labor. Okay, let's start from the standpoint theory of automation. Standpoint theory of automation see automation as driven by social antagonism and the hierarchies of class, gender, and race, from processes of subjectification that are at the same time processes of resistance, refusal, and reappropriation. The expression standpoint theory comes here, I take it from feminist studies, where it emphasizes subjectivity as an antagonistic and active force in knowledge production. That can be defined, I think, in different ways also as antagonistic or even biopolitical, referring to the works of some scholar inspired by Foucault. Social theories of automation in general stress the effect of labor resistance and also unionization on the investments in automation. And in this faith, one should also include the impact of migration, as my friend Sandro Mezzadra does, and others, with others. Marx famously stated that machinery is the most powerful weapon for suppressing strikes, and that it would be possible to write a whole history of the invention made since 1830 for the sole purpose of providing capital with weapons against working class revolt. I was quoting Marx's Capital here. Historians such as Eric Hobsbawm and E.P. Thompson have rescued the movement of machine breakers, such as Luddism, from the accusation of technophobia, and show their role in a novel class composition. In fact, already in the 19th century, the machine was a locus of social struggles, as Maxime Berg reminded us in her book on the machinery question. In the 20th century, Italian operaismo initiated a different critique of the neutrality of technology in production, see the work of Panzieri, and pushed for another position. It viewed labor struggles as a primary, not secondary actor in capitalist innovation. Famously, in the journal Classe Operaia, Mario Tronti famously advanced his Copernican turn in class theory. He wrote, "We too saw capitalist development first and the workers second. This is a mistake. Now we have to turn the problem on its head, change orientation, and start again from first principle, which means focusing on the struggle of the working class," end of quote. More recently, Antonio Negri and Michael Hart have advocated the appropriation of fixed capital, considering that the border between human and machine is difficult to trace. They wrote, "Our intellectual and corporeal development are inseparable from the creation of machines internal and external to our minds and bodies. Machines constitute and are constituted by human reality." But other autonomist feminist thinkers, such as Silvia Federici, have contested such an optimistic view and sees emancipation only outside the sphere of technology, moving from the observation that domestic and care labor has been barely automated. Along similar lines, authors such as Ruth Schwartz, Cohen, and more recently Astra Taylor, have extended the sphere of automation to include domestic and reproductive work, revealing that automation made women work more, not less. Shulamit Firestone and Donna Haraway, from a different perspective, have advocated for women's emancipation through technology. And more recently, Neda Tanasovsky and Kalin Dvora have shown how the dreams of full automation, which include AI, are grounded on the surrogate humanity of enslaved servants, proletarians, and women that make possible through their forced or invisibilized labor the universalistic idea of the autonomous, often white and Western subject. Let's move to another group of theories. Labor theories of automation explain its development from the perspective of the material logic of production and the division of labor or labor process, rather than the standpoint of subjectivities. Adam Smith was the first to sketch a labor theory of automation in The Wealth of Nations by recognizing that machines are, I quote, "invented mostly by imitating the organization of tasks in the workplace." Hegel's notion of abstract labor, as already repeated, as labor that gives form to machinery as well as social institutions, was indebted partially to Adam Smith, who Hegel commented already in his Jena lecture. Nevertheless, it fell to Babbage to systematize Adam Smith's insight in a consistent labor theory of automation that he exposed in his popular manual on the economy of machinery and manufacturers. I quote this passage by Babbage. "Perhaps the most important principle on which the economy of a manufacturer depends is the division of labor amongst the persons who perform the work. The division of labor suggests the contrivance of tools and machinery to execute its processes. When each process has been reduced to the use of some simple tool, the union of all these tools actuated by one moving power constitutes a machine. Marx adopted this labor theory of automation in part 4 of Capital and had already discussed it in the Grundrisse, where he stressed that the road to technological innovation usually is not through the analysis as in scientific laws and in scientific application, in the application of science to production. He wrote, the road is rather analysis through the division of labor, which gradually transforms the worker's operation into a more and more mechanical ones, so that at a certain point, a mechanism can step into their places, unquote. When Babbage wrote that the division of labor suggests the contrivance of tools and machinery to execute this process, he meant that the design of the division of labor shapes the inner design of technology. The spontaneous intelligence of the cooperation of labor gives form to automation first, rather than the other way around. Babbage complemented this theory with the principle of labor calculation, that's the way I call it, which Braverman termed famously as the Babbage principle, to indicate that the division of labor allows another key function, the precise computation of the cost of labor and resources. And this is the second quote, is the quote of the Babbage principle. The master manufacturer, by dividing the work to be executed into different processes, each requiring different degrees of skill and force, can purchase exactly the precise quantity of both, which is necessary for each process. In short, the division of labor is an instrument of measurement and implicit metric of labor, dividing the workforce in classes of skill and therefore salary. Babbage's vision of management had clearly a disciplinary nature, and many scholars have been commenting on this. Recently, Meredith Whitaker or James Maldon and Boxivu have traced back this discipline to the discipline of enslaved workers in the colonial plantations. Many scholars have stressed the similarity between the surveillance and discipline in the plantation and the techniques to measure and organize labor in the industrial factory. As known, the labor theory of automation inspired the early projects of computation. Babbage maintained the two principles of the division of labor as a cornerstone of his calculating engines, such as the difference engine, prototype of the modern computer. He was inspired by the French mathematician Gaspard de Prony, who had the idea of applying Adam Smith's principle of the division of labor to hand calculation of a logarithmic table. Babbage took the Prony's algorithm, known also as the method of difference, and sought to embody it into a mechanism that became then the difference engine. And we can say that in synthesis, indeed, computation was born by the application of the principle of the division of labor as the automation of the division of mental labor in this case. Babbage's intuition was later revived by key pioneers of computation, such as Alan Turing, but also Simon and Newell, who openly acknowledged the influence of labor management on operational research and also artificial intelligence. The most acute reader of Babbage's theory of the division of labor in the 20th century remains Harry Braverman, whose influential book, Labor and Monopoly Capital, initiated the labor process and the skilling debate, as you know very well. Braverman extended his critique of Babbage to Taylorism of the 20th century, in the 20th century, and highlighted how scientific management constitutes a technique of knowledge extraction and alienation. He identified three principles of Taylorism. First, the dissociation of the labor process from the skills of workers. Second, the separation of conception from execution. Third, the use of monopoly over knowledge to control each step of the labor process. Criticizing this principle, Braverman aimed at recognizing the role of cooperative labor and the spontaneous intelligence of workers also in the development of innovation and scientific abstraction, with a perspective close to historical epistemology of science of Boris Essen, for instance. Braverman argued that the industrial science did not help automation, rather labor organization did. And against the myth about the role of science in industry, Braverman brought the canonical example of the steam engine, which prompted the development of the science of thermodynamics rather than the other way around. The Babbage principle sees the division of labor as a structure of relation to be reorganized, but also as a means to measure labor. The division of labor becomes, as a matter of fact, an instrument of measurement and computation. An optimal disposition of task is an implicit measure of each task in terms of wage, time, energy, and resources that are required for that production, that kind of production. It should be repeated that measures are not imposed from above, from science, for instance, but part of a long, we could say, political negotiation and economic dynamics. The clock, we say sometimes, historically appears as the first matrix of labor in the industrial age. The clock can be seen as the first productive machine of modernity. Yet, as also Moshe Postone, among others, noted, it was the new and more abstract temporal organization of production and circulation in the 14th century Europe that required the development of more exact clocks, not the other way around. And we can take we can look at other two key technology of the industrial age, such as the steam engine and the telegraph. Norton Wise has proposed to see both of them as mediating machines, as epistemic mediators in between the domains of political economy and natural philosophy, between labor and science. The steam engine, for instance, played a twofold role in the measurement of labor and the consolidation of the metric unit of work in physics. And in a similar way, the telegraph imposed the first quantification of language and encoding into a binary code. These insights point to a common ground between value and labor in theories of automation, according to which technology is not only a means of production, but in fact also an instrument for measuring production and its value. And this perspective can be called, or I call it myself, in general, a metric theory of automation. And then let's have a look at the value theories. Even this one is quite probably too compressed summary. Value theories of automation explains automation as a process that capitalism steers from the outside, selecting just those technologies that improve production and circulation. When Ramin Ramtin wrote Capital and Automation, he found at the time that, I quote, although the literature on automation is certainly extensive, there is a clear gap in that which deals with the issue of automation from the perspective of a Marxian value theory, unquote. According to Ramtin, technology has to be understood from the point of view of the value form that capital impresses on it as a seal. And also, following himself, Marx's canonical lesson in part 4 of Capital, Ramtin stressed that the purpose of capitalist technology is not to rise the quantity of output in general, but to extract relative surplus value. I quote Ramtin here. The ultimate test of any technology of production under capitalism is its actual power to increase surplus labor time relative to necessary labor time. However, the social aspect of the measure of the development of technology is translated into technical features. In this top-down perspective, capital is not the mother of invention. Technological innovation usually happens via, for instance, research and development units where capital directly subsumes scientific work. In the Schumpeterian variance of this perspective, often popular also in Marxist circles, capital remains agnostic to the design of technology. Technological development occurs according to its own logic, and only thereafter capitals adopt the most fitting innovation through a process of selection. This is the case also in the account of new sources of energy in the industrial age that I don't have time to expand, but I notice how also both Andreas Malm and Soren Mao stressed that coal, as we know, won over water as an energy source for mills because the abstract quality of coal was selected by the new regime of abstract labor. Steam engines allow factories to move close to the urban areas and establish a clockwork disciplines. Other value theories of automation exist that see, for instance, economic growth, crisis, or stagnation independent from the fate of automation. In a tradition that runs from Brenner's The Boom and the Bubble to Benanav's Automation and the Future of Work to Smith's Smart Machine and Service Work, it is the fall of profit and investment to cause underemployment, not automation per se. In this reading, robots won't steal your job because stagnation has already eroded the ground for production. Matthew Kohler has recently criticized this view of stagnation, arguing that I quote, "These approaches misdiagnose the problem, replacing technological determinism with economic determinism. Further, they misinterpret the recomposition of global capitalism and labor institutions while neglecting class struggle," unquote. According to Cole, deindustrialization had produced dynamism in the service sector and new forms of automation such as AI, whose economic rationale may contribute at the end to stagnation, but whose dynamics has yet to be explained. Value theories of automation exist also in a radical version that attempts to build an epistemology of technology, as Alfredson Rethel did once, between the money form and, for instance, the abstractions of Greek philosophy. John Beller and Seb Franklin argued that the abstraction of the value form, rather than the abstraction of labor, is what gave shape to information technologies. In synthesis, in the capitalist mode of production, the machine crystallizes an economic diagram, an organization of labor, a technique of measurement, and a social hierarchy. In short, we could say a value form, a labor form, a metric form, and a form of subjectivity. These four dimensions are deeply imbricated. In capitalist logic, an increase in profit extraction implies a tighter division of labor. Any tighter division of labor implies a vertical division of labor that is a social hierarchy of skill. Any hierarchy implies a matrix. Any matrix implies previous conflict and negotiation around cultural and economic value, but also cultural value. Quantifications appears also here as the road to automation. That automation itself engenders then novel metrics of labor and profit. And I wonder if one should consider whether at the end, the very nature of technology is about hierarchy and measure. And in this way, one could also imagine a parallel between technology as a particular equivalent to measure value and money as a general equivalent to measure value. Take a sip of water. So following this very schematic overview, following the scheme of the four theories of automation, this second part analyzes four key aspects of artificial intelligence. First, its current social form, that is microwork. Second, its metric form, that is psychometrics. Third, its labor form, that is the form of its management or patterns of life analysis. No, sorry, I didn't follow it. I read in a different order. Okay, first part, the social form of AI, microwork. The second one is the labor form of AI, that is pattern of life analysis. Third one is the metric form of AI, that is psychometrics, in my opinion. And the value form of AI, that is vector capital. I hope I updated the slides accordingly, properly, let's see. In the early digital age, let's have a look at the microwork. In the early digital age, the hacker stood as the symbol of technological resistance, becoming later a metaphor for the cognitive worker at large, as well as anyone today dealing with machines. The hacker was a misspelled problem. This term, per se an Orientalist stereotype, describes a freelance worker for the Amazon Mechanical Turk platform, who is hired to perform repetitive online tasks and is now defined as a micro-worker. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos has cynically defined Turkers artificial intelligence, since they are employed to automate tasks that automation fails to accomplish. Notably, Amazon Mechanical Turk played a big role in Fei-Fei Li's project of the first dataset of deep learning, ImageNet. And similar platforms are still used today to outsource the ghost work of AI around the world. Eventually, the micro-worker became the prototype of the gig worker of the platform economy, such as the rider of food delivery or the driver of ride-sharing companies. Today, the distinction between hacker, micro-worker, and gig worker is increasingly blurred as they all engage in acts of algorithmic resistance. The rise of AI should be seen also as part of a long process of deskilling and declassing of digital workers that trace back at least to the 2000 dot-com crash, which resulted into the proletarianization of the hacker or the making of a new cyber proletariat, as Nick Dyer-Whitford calls it. Microworkers and gig workers exemplify the precarious labor subjectivity and class composition of current AI order. Their jobs are often bullshit jobs, to quote David Graeber. These subjectivities remain, however, antagonistic ones. This reserve army of digital workers and users has been politicized and has also animated the alter globalization movement, as well as controversial generation, in which we could also indicate form of radicalization, for instance, in the United States towards the alt-right and also nationalistic hacker groups. One should never overlook this dark side of the processes of automation and the way they make some social figures organic and obscure others. In June 2018, Microsoft acquired GitHub, marking a crucial passage in the capture of collective work by AI monopolies. As a community of more than 100 million workers or users or coders, GitHub is not only crucial to develop AI code, its repositories have become dataset to train AI to write AI code. In November 2022, the release of ChatGPT can be interpreted as the symbolic end of the knowledge society paradigm, an optimistic worldview that was expected to generate prosperity through knowledge's virtuous proliferation, while underestimating its proneness to automation. In spring 2025, major corporations in the United States announced layoffs of white-collar workers, planning to deploy large language models, apparently, to automate different kind of tasks, administrative routine, as well as creative and professional skills in coding, design, journalism, cinema, and even education. The hacker who wanted to be a cyborg found herself at the end to be a micro worker or ghost worker subsumed by many of these AI platforms. Okay, these slides are not the one that was supposed to be. It's fine. Okay, there's missing slide, but it's okay. Let's have a look at the structure of the infrastructure of artificial intelligence. Rather than the repeated trite debates whether AI may be truly intelligent or not, a simple materialistic analysis of its infrastructure immediately reveals its nature. The AI infrastructure can be described as follows. Here I had prepared a slide of, indeed, the whole planetary infrastructure of AI, but for some reason it's missing from this version. So we can describe the gigantic production pipeline of AI in this way. There is a planetary multitude of micro workers connected via global digital network to a highly centralized data center on which runs a large AI model that has been previously trained on a vast data set. The input of the AI pipeline is cultural heritage, social relation, collective data in general. But one could say that the input and output of AI are the same, basically microtasks. Microtasks of the everyday routine and workflow are distilled into AI models, and microtasks are what the AI models automate. In the case of AI artifacts, it appears somehow as the structure of the division of labor, the structure of automation, and the structure of the commodity also share a deep similarity. And we could talk about a kind of structural isomorphism between this dimension, between labor, automation, and the commodity. In synthesis, looking at this genealogy, however, the inner architecture of AI, its outer network, its artifact, in all this structure, one cannot but record that the constitution of AI is a global division of labor. As mentioned before, the division of labor is the genealogy of AI, and conversely, AI projects back on society a new division of labor. In the Eye of the Master, I was discussing how the division of labor has become more and more complex through time, innervating into the social fabric outside the factory and organizing into extensive patterns of life. The consequence of this expansion and transformation is that also the techniques and instruments to trace and measure the social division of labor, the division of labor in society, have evolved. The old concern of time and motion studies are found also today in the theory of urban rhythm analysis by Lefebvre or in the trajectory analysis of that maps workers' movement in the gig economy, for instance. These dynamic social patterns in urban trajectories draw the outline of the extended labor cooperation today, is the outline of the Gesamtarbeiter in the current mode of production. The power of current AI models is their capacity to adapt or not, to a global and flexible collective worker. In fact, the division of labor has become the object of a complex techniques of pattern of life analysis that is also common, by the way, to military infrastructure. And after this, guess what we take?
The slide. It's fine.
As soon as you mention the military.
That's Donald Trump as at work behind the
As soon as
scenes.
you mention the military.
Yes, you can proceed.
Let's give us a moment. We'll fix this.
It is the anyway, it's good to take a break. Okay, so we have been seeing the social form of AI according to my perspective, that is microwork, the pattern of life analysis, that are the complex way in which the division of labor emerges. And now we see the metric form of AI, that is psychometrics. The idea of knowledge society often operated as a discriminatory paradigm, elevating a new labor aristocracy in the same way that guilds celebrated skilled artisan during the industrial age. As Quinn Slobodian observes, terms such as information age and knowledge economy began to circulate in the 1990s, at the same time when neoliberal elites were rediscovering the IQ test, itself a technique of psychometrics that was used as a means of class, gender, and racial discrimination. This moment was marked by the publication of the Bell Curve, Intelligence and Class Structure in American Life, a racist book that argued that the IQ test demonstrates that class division is not historical, but natural and motivated by ethnic background. The IQ test became then an alibi for neoliberal circles to support the idea of intelligence hierarchies, what Slobodin has termed neurocastes more recently, and in general was used to justify in the United States just low salaries for Black Americans. And in the United States, we have seen recently the rise, coming back, a revival of this debate on the IQ. Since the early 20th century, psychometrics, in the form of IQ test, among others, has played the role of a social measure. Psychometrics, as we know, belongs to the controversial legacy of Alfred Binet, Charles Spearman, and Louis Thurston, and rose to dominance in U.S. psychology department in the 1950s, consolidating as a branch of applied statistics. A discipline itself has never been a neutral discipline. We know that from its origin, statistics was in state administration, often used as eugenic policy. It functions as a technique of normalization, a means of defining the social average, calculating deviation and abnormalities, and regulating population. As Stephen Jay Gould showed in this very important book, The Mismeasure of Man, psychometrics emerged from the pseudoscience of craniometry and was deeply implicated in supplying the pseudoscientific rationales for this hierarchy of class, race, and gender. But it's revealing that the mathematical form of psychometrics, that is multidimensional analysis, is what is at the origin of the current form of AI, deep learning, which is an evolution of artificial neural networks. In the mid-1950s, Frank Rosenblatt developed the first artificial neural network perceptron. It did not simply imitate the structure of biological neural networks, as widely repeated, but implemented techniques of linear algebra and multidimensional analysis that he, as a trained psychologist, adopted from psychometrics. The perceptron implemented statistical techniques to automate the recognition of visual rather than psychological patterns, but the logic behind was basically the same. So I think that the IQ tests and artificial intelligence are part of the same socio-technical process in which the former operates as a social matrix and the latter as its form of automation. Although IQ tests started to be used in the US Army and schools already in the early 20th century, Their revival today, it's the revival that IQ has today in the new authoritarian culture associated with the alt-right and Silicon Valley, signals that AI still demands social metrics to discipline population and workforce. The power of AI relies on its monopoly form, on the accumulation of labor and knowledge extracted from the collective worker and privatized into a few data sets and models. AI is quintessentially a capitalist technology because its horizon is the totality of collective knowledge, social communication, and cultural heritage. In a sort of Babbage principle expanded to a planetary scale, the monopoly of AI is constituted by the computation and accumulation of units of microtasks. These units of microtasks are known as tokens. In computer science, a token is a measuring unit of language and instruction that does not correspond to units of natural language, but to how an algorithm fragments language in the most economical way. The token is also the cost unit of the microtasks that are automated by AI data centers. Users send short prompts to AI models that are monetized in tokens and receive large outputs, that is, under the form of microtasks, that are monetized again in tokens. The number of users, their time spent on AI platforms, the number of automated microtasks, the cost per token, and the ratio of parameters per token define, among many other factors, AI's economic dimension. But there is a paradox here that probably we'll see in the future, that workers will be requested to buy tokens of microtasks in order to work. They will have to pay to automate their own work. The value form of AI, and here I enter a more exploratory terrain, the value form of AI is what one could tentatively call vector capital, understood not just as privatization and mechanization of cultural capital, but as the form of the relative surplus value that AI embodies as a novel machine. Training data sets project collective knowledge as data points in a multidimensional space, while the model attempts to build a stable representation of them through vector embeddings and linear algebra, of which I'm not talking. This technique is not new, neither in economics, where it's used to calculate eigenvalues and eigenvectors, nor in the sociology of knowledge. Think of Pierre Bourdieu and the way he advanced a geometric modeling to quantify the basic dimension of social space and explore sociological hypotheses. The making of AI models is a form of automation in which, metaphorically, one could say that vectors replace workers, as vectors ultimately calculate the many variables of labor cooperation and its spontaneous intelligence. Marx first proposed the idea that the division of labor performs a sort of mathematical equalization of the collective worker. The division of labor under the system of manufacturer not only simplifies and multiplies the qualitatively different parts of society's collective worker, but also creates a fixed mathematical relation or ratio which regulates the quantitative extent of those parts. That is, the relative numbers of workers or the relative size of the group of workers for each spatial function. Thus, alongside the qualitative articulation, the division of labor develops a quantitative rule and the proportionality for the social labor process. This insight can be easily extended to the structure of machinery. As Kenji Mori noted, I quote, "According to Marx's understanding about the principle of multiples, the machinery system would be appropriately understood as a mathematical fixed vector of physical and labor inputs, around which particular cases might be perturbed randomly. But similarly, from a mathematical point of view, the vector capital of an AI model could be defined as the equalization of all the data points projected on its vector space, more specifically as the ratio between AI model parameters and the dimension of the data set. This ratio, that is the equalization of social variables into a model, point to something about the constitution of fixed capital of machinery that in previous stages of automation remain unclear. This ratio, as Marx hinted, I think, is an index of the transformation of living labor into dead labor, today of living knowledge into machine knowledge. The idea of a vector capital is a quantitative one here. It's about the calculation of relative surplus value, in the sense quite different from qualitative notions such as cultural capital or cognitive capital. This was the slides that was missing before. It's appearing now. But you can visualize, yeah, this, okay. Okay, looking for a deeper perspective, this third part engages with the theory of economic cycle and specifically with Ernst Mandel's critique of the long-way theory of capitalist development. Mandel argued that technological cycles are not autonomous, but bound to the economic and social cycles. This part extends his insight to study the rise and potentially imminent decline of AI social order, moving from a brief discussion of Marx's formula of the rate of profit. The organic theory of automation, it was my attempt to make a synthesis of the social diagram of automation that is usually employed in critical theory in various disciplines. This synthesis, however, has to be set in motion and studied in the dynamics of history. A way of doing so is to consider another idea by Marx, that is the formula of the rate of profit and the notion of organic composition of capital. Despite its imprecise formulation and the confused literature that follow, as pointed out by Alfredo and Sadfield in some publication, and also by David Harvey, back already in the early 80s, the formula of the rate of profit and the organic composition of capital is used here as a depiction, I try, of the antagonism between labor and capital mediated by technology. This formula should help to read the rate of profit, that is also the rate of labor exploitation, as the proportion between surplus value and the sum of capital invested in machinery or materials and human labor, as you know. But when read within the automation debate, the dynamics of this formula can be interpreted in different ways. The first could be this one. Usually we say that the more automation is introduced in production, the more workers are replaced, the less surplus values is extracted, therefore the rate of profit falls. Yet this movement can take a different turn. When automation is introduced, indeed workers are replaced, but new skilled or unskilled worker may be required and employed. Then surplus values is extracted more abundantly, and therefore the rate of profit grows. Automation sometimes first replaces, then displaces and multiplies workers. However, when automation saturates the sphere of production and circulation with its machine and commodity, surplus value falls again, and so does the rate of profit. But this dynamic can be read from another angle, that is from working class antagonism. This formula helps to see how worker resistance raises the cost of labor and therefore may force capital to develop new technology of automation, which replaces workers in the short run, but then maybe displacing them to new jobs in the long run. At the end, this formula is not describing a fall, but more like a cyclical development in history. In his influential book, Late Capitalism, and in another book on the topic, Long Waves of Capitalist Development, Ernst Mandel revisited the long wave theory of capitalist cycle that, although originated from Marxism, was often left to internalist readings such as those of Kondratiev and Schumpeter. For his part, Mandel advanced an externalist reading of economic cycles, in which exogenous actors such as social struggles, rather than endogenous factors, push economic growth and technological innovation. But as you know, often today information technologies and even AI are described as one of the main drivers of the current economic cycle. Mandel, however, did not see technology as separated from its organic division of labor. He wrote, "Each specific technology, radically different from the previous one, is centered around a specific type of machine system, and this in turn presupposes a specific form of organization of the labor process," unquote. According to Mandel, machines operated by craft workers were followed by machines operated by machinists, and this by assembly lines involving the skilled workers. And one can envision this series of machinic assemblage continuing up to the age of information and artificial intelligence. However, Mandel stressed how, I quote, "the transition from one to another has historically involved serious working class resistance." In order to drive up the rate of profit to the extent necessary to change the whole economic climate, the capitalist must first break the organizational strength and militancy of the working class, unquote. But I keep on reading, I keep on quoting him now again. That's the way Mandel, in this book from 1995, described these economic waves. Each of these revolutions in labor organizations, made possible through successive technological revolutions, grew out of conscious attempts by employers to break down the resistance of the working class and to further increase in the rate of exploitation. The first technological revolution was clearly an answer to the struggle of the British workers to shorten the normal workday. Marx himself commented on this at length in Capital. The second technological revolution was closely related to the increasing resistance of the strong crafts unions, both in the United States and Western Europe, to more direct control by management over the work process. In fact, Taylorism arose directly out of the attempts to impose such direct control. Likewise, the third technological revolution had a direct link to the growth of unionization among semi-skilled mass production workers and to the need to whittle away the power of control over conveyor belt production made possible by union strength of that type. Mandel's own theory of the long waves of capitalist development is a complex synthesis of intereconomic and extra-economic dynamics. It's interesting how, for him, the crisis of capitalism is driven by endogenous factors, while the growth of capitalism is driven by exogenous factors, that is also class struggles and class dynamism. Against economicism, Mandel recognized that the cycle of social struggle is relatively autonomous from the technological economic cycle. What is interesting in this graph that you find in the book is that the cycles of the class struggles, namely strikes in these statistics, is asynchronous with that of economic growth, if you look carefully. Mandel argued that a variety of external system shocks can be crucial for ending a long economic depression and starting a new wave of expansion. These exogenous factors may include shift in consumption, changes in labor organization, outcomes of social struggles and strike, fluctuation in the labor supply due to migration, monetary hegemony, wars and revolution, the expansion and contraction of credit, and shift in core-periphery relation, very complex matrix. But he concluded that long wave cycles sees a dialectical relation between cycles of social struggles, cycle of technological innovation, and cycle of capitalist growth and crisis. We assume that there is a long cycle of class struggle, is said, or to be more precise, a long cycle of rise and decline, working class militancy and radicalization, that is relatively independent of the long waves of more rapid accumulation and slower accumulation, although to some extent interwoven with them. Let's try now to position AI in this picture. In the following, I will try to describe the problem of artificial intelligence according to some internal technical limits and then in its external economic limits. There are also geopolitical limits. Like any piece of machinery, AI experiences obsolescence and depreciation. The turnover seems quite rapid. AI models from a few years ago are replaced by new ones. They quickly lose value. We see that. But AI models feature a more profound kind of deterioration technically known as model collapse. Model collapse is the declining performance of a generative AI models when these AI models are trained not on genuine data, but on content that has been generated by AI models themselves, published on the web and incorporated into training data set that are scraped from the web. Model collapse is also termed model autophagy, as the model is eating its own data or slop in a recursive loop that degrades the statistical resolution of the model. Let's consider, for instance, the case of large language models. They encode human knowledge from canonical corpuses of books, as well as spontaneous sources such as websites, forums, and chats. They excel in translation, we know, and in reproducing knowledge of past archives at this very moment. But the output is often regurgitated online, polluting the future sources that will be used to train them. And it's also for this reason that Cory Doctorow has recently defined this entropic decline of web culture in general as enshittification. This means that in the future, AI companies and media companies in general will desperately search for original data from sources that have not been contaminated by AI itself. In this sense, an economy of scarcity, AI is causing, in this sense, an economy of scarcity, valorizing all cultural heritage that has not been corrupted by the current generative AI. Similar phenomena happened in any media revolution since printmaking, yet the novelty of AI is that the dissemination of its artifacts affect the design of the machine itself recursively. Aside from being a technical issue, an endogenous limit only, model collapse should be interpreted also as an exogenous limit in a larger socio-economical perspective. Model collapse points to a socio-economic limit of any apparatus of automation, sometimes called the human-in-the-loop issue. Eventually, model collapse provides a tangible analogy and evidence for the crisis of automation. A sort of model collapse always existed in automation as degradation of its design in the continuous tension to capture the multiplicity of living labor. As seen earlier in Mandel's criticism of the long-wave theory and the synthesis of automation theories that I proposed, the antagonism of labor is what often triggers a new wave of automation, but then it is the division of labor that gives automation its design. As soon as a new division of labor emerges through society, technology has to adapt and evolve in order to capture it. However, this process is never linear and complete, but spurious and conflictive. And similarly, AI models strive to adapt to the generation of new forms of social life, and they have to be fed continuously with fresh data to provide an updated picture of the collective mind and the collective worker. In short, any form of automation, including AI, is never autonomous and maintains a critical dependency on the evolution of society and living labor. Finally, I think if we had time, the evolution of AI and large language models should be read in a broader geopolitical and geocultural perspective. AI is part of a common tendency of digital capitalism towards the formation of monopolies. Although they can assure incredibly high rents, monopolies affect competition and engender stagnation. One can take once again here, for instance, the emblematic rise of ChatGPT, paradigmatic example of this tendency. It is, I think, specifically a large language model that represent the final stage in the parable of information technology from the global north that, by the way, started with Claude Shannon as a statistical modeling of the English language. And today we see somehow has US cultural hegemony reaching a historical limit of its sphere of influence, is imposing global English as lingua franca, that at the same time is a peak and a downfall, because today large language models such as ChatGPT that represent a powerful capacity for translation and text generation in all idioms, born out of the statistical representation of printed English, these large language models represent also the end of the necessity to use English as lingua franca. And I think a mirror of the global economy in stagnation, large language models are increasingly struggling to generate consistent outputs due to this phenomenon of model collapse just illustrated. This inflation and degradation of the training data points, the inflation and degradation of the training data points to a scarcity of living labor that is required constantly to make AI look intelligent and valuable, in a way similar to the dynamics of economic and technological cycle analyzed by Mandel. The collapse of large language model can be taken as a metaphor of the crisis of knowledge extractivism and the global trade system as a whole, to which the US administration is responding, not by chance, with neo-colonial tariffs. In synthesis, I think it's not an exaggeration to argue that the social order of AI has entered a phase of decline, partly due to the hegemony of techno-monopolies that have slowed down valorization. Economies in decline, after all, tend to generate their monsters: military expansion, authoritarian culture, and toxic personalities. However, through the fissures of this collapsing system, alternative futures glimmer, I hope, as anti-war, anti-colonial, and anti-authoritarian movement have recently shown. At the end of this complex excursus, this marathon through the theories of automation, I would like to remember Mandel's late reflection regarding the role of political organization and social movement within the long-term dynamics of capitalism and technological development. At the conference, the Long Wave Debate in Brussels in 1989, he summarized his position against the fatalism of any economist's interpretation of history in this way: to bring the controversy to its vital implication. Is the class struggle cycle mechanically determined by economic forces, resulting essentially from levels of employment? Do long-term depressions make crushing defeats of the working class unavoidable? Was Adolf Hitler's victory in 1933 inevitable? Or should one rather say that there is indeed a relative autonomy of long-term class struggle results, a relative desynchronization of the class struggle and the ups and downs of investment, output, employment, and income? Can the subjectivity factor in history make a decisive difference between victory and defeat of, for example, fascism? Thanks for your attention.